to Coaching Conversations with Patrice and Liz. I'd love to welcome you back today. We've got a great time that we have planned with you. This is pod number 3, and it is on trauma stewardship. So we have Mara here, and we've got Liz, and we're ready to go. This is our third in a series of 6 conversations. Our first was an introduction to trauma, and our second one was, I don't know.
We did some things. We did a lot of things the second one.
Okay, you guys, you know me. It is attachment and developmental trauma. See, I had to make this fun. Anyway, let me get back to myself. Okay. Today, we're going to be delving into trauma stewardship, and we want you just to be able to sit and listen and really think through some of the concepts that we're talking about. So again, our goals are a continuation of all the other trainings, and we want to make this a tool for new hiring. And we just want you to get into this, get involved, and see how you can apply everything that we have been talking about to everything that you do as family advocates. So with that, I'll just take you back to Liz so she can give us an update and recap on the family.
Yeah, so like Patrice said, we did some things in the last few episodes. And we really have started to hash out some of the racial dynamics in this family, the gender dynamics, the generational impacts of the trauma this family experiences through various phases in their life and as their family's grown, and then where they're at now. And then on today's episode, we really have the goal of allowing you all, whether you're watching by yourself or watching with a group, to start looking at vicarious trauma and start looking at it honestly. And what does it look like for you? What does your burnout look like? What does re-traumatization by work look like for you? And how do you bring it to your coaches? How do you bring it to Mara or Kevin or anyone else on our team who's meant to support you and get you through these moments? You know, how do you advocate for yourself in those moments? How do you allow other people to advocate for you? So that's really what the goal of this episode is, and why you may just be joining us for this episode, is because we're really, really putting a flashlight on that and sticking with that and having that larger conversation. And so with that, some of the characters that we've talked about more in depth in past episodes, they'll still be referenced, but maybe you're not getting as much new information about their interactions, about their relationships, but rather we're working with what we've already brought to the table. So if you have not already referred to the resources, pull up those descriptions of the family, of each individual that's in the family, and get to know them a little bit, so that as we're talking about them and what we've already established about them, it makes the most sense. And then let's jump right into it. And Mara's gonna start us off and help us with some of the more concrete understanding and concepts that we need to really do this topic some justice.
We've already thrown around some terms, so I'm going to start by just defining some of those terms. We said the term trauma stewardship, vicarious trauma, and I don't know if we said it yet, but there's also secondary trauma that we often talk about. We talk about burnout. Many people have heard these terms, and often they're used interchangeably. And you know, when we talk generally about trauma stewardship, there was a book called Trauma Stewardship, written by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky, that looked at this issue, that looks at how do we be good stewards of other people's trauma, right? What does it look like to be someone who, instead of avoiding these difficult experiences, instead of going in the opposite direction, we go towards them, right? We sit with them, we on a regular basis engage in traumatic experience, right, as part of what we do. And often, because it is our profession, we don't necessarily consider that it's having an impact, right? So when we talk about vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, these terms are interchangeable. Vicarious trauma is what happens when I witness something or hear about something, right? Traumatizing. And my brain has to still make sense of that, right? It triggers a lot of the same systems of survival, right, that any type of trauma triggers. And sometimes, because we don't have direct engagement with it, it can affect us in even different ways, more severe ways sometimes, because we don't have, so, you think about, if everybody gets to live through some kind of traumatic experience together, they have support, they have community. And then I come in and I'm dealing with the aftermath and I'm hearing about these horrible things that happen. And I am not attending to what that looks like for me, right? I may start to have nightmares, I might start to have trouble sleeping, and I may not be able to even name and recognize that I'm having post-traumatic stress responses, right? So I remember early on, when I was like 18 years old, I was working as a police victim advocate, and they hadn't even given me any work really to do. My job was they give me a huge stack of police reports. They were all usually domestic violence incidents, and my job was to just read through them and flag the ones that needed follow-up, right? So I would read through what happened, and if it sounded like there needed to be some kind of follow-up, I would flag it and give it to a more senior advocate, and they would respond. So you would think, again, my job is clerical, right? No big deal. No one was really talking to me about trauma. No one was talking to me about, needing support. It was like, hey, here's your stacks, read through them. You're a volunteer. You're our little peon. So there's your work. And I started having nightmares every night. And all of these things that I was reading were, my brain was trying to make sense of it, right? My anxiety was high. I was starting to feel like this new sense of alert in my community. I had not grown up in a situation where I witnessed domestic violence. This wasn't necessarily triggering anything for me. But it was really hard for me to integrate this information. Right? It was really scary and overwhelming, and I wasn't actually recognizing that at all. It was just like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. I'm not making any connection here, and of course, this, just sitting and reading papers is not going to impact me, right? But it was, and so. I can only imagine, and I have been later on in situations where I was going into people's homes, how much more severe that can be when you're walking in to a situation where you are witnessing directly really terrible things happening, right? And sometimes feeling pretty powerless to do anything about it. So I think about our family here and what this advocate walked into. We described in our first podcast, there's this incident with the family where the advocate walks in and the family is in crisis, and Quinn has self-harmed and she's bleeding and there's yelling, and it's pretty terrifying, right? Mm-hmm. And there's no way for that not to be traumatic for every single person there. It doesn't matter what your role is. We don't get to be immune just because we're not there as a family member, right? We're still there experiencing it, right? Doesn't mean our responses are going to be the exact same, right? But there will be an impact. We can't avoid that. So I want to talk about the handout that you all have. Looks like this, and it has the 16 signs of vicarious trauma response. And I think most people who've worked in this field, even for a few months, probably will recognize some of these signs. So I'm going to read these signs off, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. The first one is feeling helpless and hopeless. And this is a hard one because most people who get into this field have a little bit of a savior complex, right? Like as much as we hate to admit it, people who get into social work, people who get into advocacy work, they believe that they have some power to change things, right? And they come in with this confidence and this belief that I'm going to make a difference, right? And there's some issues with that we could talk about, but ultimately it's our ethic. It's part of our identity a lot of the time. And then we start to immerse ourselves in the work, and we start to recognize how painful and complicated people's lives can be, and how sometimes it feels how insignificant we are in the scope of things, right? I mean, I don't think that's true, but it can start to feel that way. You can start to feel like none of the tools and resources I have are enough. There's no way for me to ever be enough, right? And this overwhelming sense of helplessness or hopelessness can come over us. And so that's one of the first signs that I'm starting to feel some burnout, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma. These terms are all kind of interchangeable, right? We're feeling helpless and hopeless, kind of losing some of that sheen of like, I'm here and I have all these tools and I'm going to make a difference, right? That comes along with the second sign, which is a sense that we can never do enough, right? And this one, as well as most of them, there's some truth in it, right? We can never do enough. There's never, one person is never going to come in and, put a cape on and save an entire family from, intergenerational trauma and a system of oppression and all of these things, that just, as we dive more in, as we get more training, it sort of mushrooms and gets bigger and bigger. And we start to recognize, whoa, I'm never going to be able to do enough to fix this, right? And we're going to talk more about that because our job isn't to fix it, but we can often feel that way. And we get really tight around this idea of I can never do enough, right? And that can lead to a lot of sort of spinning in place, breaking our boundaries, overextending ourselves, right? Because there's this overwhelming sense that there's so much to do and I can never do enough. That feeds right into the third sign, which is hypervigilance, right? This is a sign of, pretty universal sign of post-traumatic stress. And we see it with vicarious trauma and burnout as well. We start to be really sort of aware of everything, right? So even often I find myself, I'm really jumpy, right? Like I'm just constantly on edge. And the more on edge and jumpy I am, the more I know like, okay, I may need to do some work with myself, right? Because my nervous system is overloaded, right? I'm just sort of constantly scanning my environment and on edge and ready for something to go wrong. That can also look like hypervigilance with your kids, right? When you're working and seeing abuse, especially of children, you can start to get really afraid and wound up around no one is safe, right? And I'm going to be really aware of what's going on with the kiddos in my life and make sure that nothing bad happens to them, right? Which of course we can't do, right? We can't prevent harm in every circumstance. So we get really hypervigilant, really sort of wound up. Our brain is trying to take in all this information. And it's important to recognize that this isn't normal. It's not normal to have your full-time job be to immerse yourself in the hardest things that happen in the world, right? So your brain is in this really, this overload of trying to process all this information, make sense of it, and that's going to lead to this constant scanning and trying to see, when is this happening around me? Where might this be happening around me? Remember one time my mom said, well, you think everyone has trauma. And I'm like, well, everyone does have trauma, but she's right that I'm sort of always like, I think that there's sexual abuse happening in that family. I think that, like there's just this awareness of how much goes on in the world, and that can lead to some hypervigilance, right? As we stay in this space, right? We've talked in previous trainings about our window of tolerance. As we are outside of that window, we're not, we're in this constant state of anxiety, can never do enough, feeling helpless and hopeless, hypervigilant. We start to see diminished creativity. So we start to feel less excited about the work we're doing. We start to feel really repetitive in how we're approaching things. We don't ever feel like we have time to engage in new learning, right? We often feel like we don't have time to do the things that we love to do. So you see this just overall flattening, right? Diminished creativity, an inability to embrace complexity. So we start to really want to find all or nothing solutions or hardline rules. I often have seen this show up with staff I've supervised as like, what's the policy on this, right? So instead of addressing, I think about our family and this whole scene that this advocate walked into of, a child that's bleeding and a family in crisis and a lot of overwhelm. And I can imagine wanting to fall back on that. What's the policy? What am I supposed to do? Right? This sort of inability to embrace the complexity of the situation and be with each person's experience and my own experience in it. Right? We also start to see some minimizing, right? Minimizing our own experience or minimizing others' experience. Not being able, it's almost like our mind wants to normalize what we're seeing in order to be able to cope with it. So we stop really holding the gravity. I did a training, I've done some training with police officers, and one of them said, this stuff doesn't even faze me anymore, right? And it's sort of like a badge of honor, like I'm not fazed. And I said, that's really scary, right? It should faze you. And so when we get to that point where we're like, no big deal, right? I'm fine seeing this child in crisis bleeding. That's a really scary sign that we're probably experiencing some vicarious trauma. Chronic exhaustion, physical ailments, we're living in stress, in chronic stress, and that's going to have an impact, right? An inability to listen or wanting to avoid the emotion, avoid the things that stir up difficult feelings in us. I'm going to pause there because I'm imagining as coaches, you see these things. That's only half of them. I'm imagining you see these things and you see how they get in the way of being able to do the work. Any reactions as we have gotten through those first 8 from the two of you in anything coming up?
It. Yeah, I have felt it, even in being a family advocate, and I've heard them say they have felt it. I know that, as you said, you just stop feeling the joy of why you got into the job in the first place, because you start feeling like you said, you're all in it. You've got this cape on, like you're 10 foot tall and bulletproof, and you're ready to save the world. And then as you start getting into the family dynamics, and you see the things that are going on in the families, and it becomes hard. And you think, well, wait a minute. I was told what I need to do in this situation is give resources. So I have all my little resources, a pamphlet, and I have resources, and I know of all the free therapies, or all of these things that I should be referring to you to, but you don't have a car to get to it, or you've got this drama going on in the house that you can't even get out of bed because you've got all these things going on. And oh my word, why aren't you taking these resources? Why aren't you doing this? And then you're feeling like you have failed. The family is failing you because they aren't taking the resources that you have brought to them. And why aren't you doing that? And you've got all these feelings and things. And then on the back end, you've got, but I've got to help these people. That's what my job is. I've got to make a change in these people. They've got to get from point A to point B and kind of soon. And things start falling apart, and you feel yourself kind of shrinking more and more and more and more, and feeling like, I hate this. I'm really hating this, and I'm not doing what I need to do, and what's wrong with me? And then you find yourself kind of getting into depression and not really halfway doing the job that you love.
Yeah. And with those first 8, I think everything you just said, Patrice, is the exact reason why we haven't not one time said anything about what's the policy when you see an adolescent cutting themselves at home as an FA, because there's no policy for life and the real things the FAs are going to see. You know, those policies are made by people who get it, but not like that. Policies aren't meant to account for, you know, every little thing that could happen. There is no policy. And B, in that moment, watch, I'm gonna be blamed for everyone going rogue. But in that moment, what does a policy mean? Even if we had a policy, what does it mean? There's no purpose to it, because that one policy is not going to fit what any one family could need or what that advocate needs by being traumatized by that. And I know for me, each one of those 8 steps, I had a very specific memory of me doing each one of those things. I'm like, oh, that's that day. Oh, that was that day. And ask my loved ones how much they love having to move me up to the top flight every time I move, because I refuse to live on a level where anyone could climb to the balcony and come in, because, you know, it's me or them. I'm a fighter one. Okay, I've seen way too many. Criminal Minds was my bedtime show as a child. Okay, I won't live on the first floor. So ask all my loved ones how happy they were when I moved into this apartment and there was an elevator. Because I've carried couches up and down so many flights of stairs, because we're going to carry a couch before someone breaks in and tries to kill me one nice Tuesday night, you know. So even as coaches, as the people putting this information out there, there's so many ways that, you know, we can normalize it by saying, you know, like, us too, you know, it's normal.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying, Mara, about your experience as the clerical person kind of going through the papers. You can be traumatized by just even hearing their stories, traumatized.
And that's a normal part of this experience. That's what I think when I was learning about advocacy, it was sort of like, you should avoid burnout, right? And so in some ways, it felt like if you're burned out, you did something wrong. If you are having a vicarious trauma response, if the work is impacting you, it's because you're not professional enough, right? So I don't know if it was intentional, but somehow we started to shame the normal ways that we're going to be processing and making sense of this work, right? And so it's not about, avoid this. It's about recognize it, right? Recognizing this is coming up in you. And this is why it's so important to create support systems. This, I've heard over and over again that there's a culture of mental health, right? And it's a feel-good term, but really what that's about is being able to create the infrastructure that is required to be able to ethically do this work, right? It has to be. Yes. So, I'm going to keep going through these signs because you guys have started to hit on some of them. So we start to see these dissociative moments, right? We start to sort of check out. We start to, I will be sitting with a client and I'll lose track of what they're saying, right? I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's too much that my brain is processing. And as a way to try to keep me safe, I stop tracking. I start thinking, what am I going to do when I get home? What am I going to have for dinner? And I'm not there anymore, right? And then I might feel some shame because I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a therapist. I'm supposed to be able to focus. Well, I just have a human brain, right? And so sometimes it gets overwhelmed and I can't stay present. When I start to notice I'm doing that, though, it's a sign of I'm going to get some support, right? I might need to take a break. I might need to take a mental health day. I might need to, call my mentor and have a meeting and talk about how overwhelmed I am by the client work, right? And how much grief I'm feeling about what's going on in the world, right? So we start to see these dissociative moments sort of checking out. We might get a sense of persecution. We might get this sense of I'm overworked, because it might be true, right? And no one can help me. Right? I'm all alone. I'm the only one who can do this, right? And I can't take a day off. I can't take, as soon as you start telling yourself, I cannot afford a mental health day. I am, burned out, but if I take a mental health day, everything is going to fall apart. That's when you need to take the mental health day, right? Because you absolutely cannot believe that one day of a break for you is going to cause everyone around you to fall apart, right? And that's a clear sign of vicarious trauma. And part of the hypervigilance, right? We also see a lot of guilt and fear and anger and cynicism, right? So if you're finding yourself like feeling guilty if you got on your phone for a minute during your work shift, or feeling really guilty that you forgot to call that family back, right? And you're just racked with guilt about being human, making human error, not being able to manage it all, or feeling really afraid if I don't show up, if I don't, I'm sick today, but if I call in sick, then this family's not going to be okay, right? Mm-hmm. Big sign of vicarious trauma. The anger and the cynicism, right? This can sometimes, I might be feeling overwhelmed and overburdened by the work, and so who has less power than me? My clients, right? It's not a nice thing to talk about, but sometimes we do take that anger out on the people with the least power. And oftentimes in social services, that's the client, right? So we start to feel irritated. We unintentionally start to do things that are punitive, right? That aren't in the spirit of supporting them, because we're overwhelmed and we haven't had boundaries, and now we're coming back with this reaction, right? This anger and this cynicism. That can really feed right into that next one, an inability to empathize. We sort of lose our ability. We start to be numb to what we're hearing. We can no longer hold the gravity of the situation, right? That can show up as addictions for us. So it could be an addiction, it could be substances, it could be food, it could be exercise, it can be work. There's a lot of things that we can become very obsessive and addicted to, right? But if you find yourself kind of looping in something or looking for something to help you disconnect from what you're feeling, that can have some addictive quality, right? And then the last one is this grandiosity. And this is, I don't think many of us admit it, but sometimes we think like, wow, I would never do it that way. And I'm really, wow, I'm just so amazing at this job. And this sort of sense that I'm going to take everything on. I'm not going to ask for any help. And I am irreplaceable, right? I cannot, if I let anyone sub in for me, everything's going to fall apart, right? And so we get really overinflated in our sense of our importance. And oftentimes there's the underbelly of the hopelessness in it, right? So we kind of bounce back and forth. I'm really important and I'm totally useless and I can't do anything, right? So we can bounce back and forth, and we often see all of these things show up at once. Normal to have a few of these, like a lot of the time, right? We're working in chronic stress and chronic trauma. And the more of these you're seeing show up, the more you should take them as flags on the field that you need to take a time out, right? That you need to get support. So on the handout, we're going to talk a bit about how to respond, but I want to pause again and just give some space for us to talk about how this shows up and any reactions or thoughts on these 16 signs of burnout from the two of you.
Yeah, and while we move into our discussion, for any of you watching this with a team or by yourself in the office or at home, this would be a really good time for you to pause the video as well and go ahead and look at some of the guiding questions that we put in the resources for you, and also start diving a little bit deeper before you hear how we're taking it.
So I want to read this quote, and then I want to hear from you all. What as coaches, how are you helping people and supporting them through this? So the quote on the page says, stress resilient people are capable of negative affect when faced with adversity, but a belief in their commitment to themselves and their own well-being is the single greatest factor in thriving versus surviving, right? So that we can hold a lot of difficulty, right? We can hold a lot of pain. The most resilient providers, the most resilient stewards of trauma really believe and value their own well-being, right? And they have a fierce commitment to themselves. And so I'm wondering how you as coaches help people find that commitment to their own well-being, coming back to themselves. What does that look like in the way you support your advocates?
I think for me, I think I had this recently where I had to say, I am there for you to help you as much as I can, but I've also recognized that I can't help you unless I take care of me. So, and I want to be as transparent as possible with you, because I have seen me go off the deep end in trying to be, that person who I can't take a break. Because of course the world will come to an end if I don't. And, or I have to ask myself, where did I get that? Where did that come from for me that I felt like I couldn't take that break? So I've had to look at it and look deep in myself and see, the world isn't going to come to an end, and everything doesn't stop with me, begin with me. All I can do is my best, but I do need to, if I'm going to help you as a coach and be for real with this and be honest and transparent with you, I've got to let you know that I need to take care of me. So how do we do this? How do we work together, knowing that maybe I can't show up, maybe we have to reschedule or something, but I'll try my best to be there, but also understand maybe we can end 5 or 10 minutes early. You look tired. I'm tired. Maybe we need to take care of ourselves and end this early, or, I need to go aside here and maybe exercise or put some balance in my life so that I can come back to you and help you with and be there, be present for you in the time that I'm with you. And I can do that because I have taken care of me. And that's also what I say to the family advocates is, how are you doing? Are you taking care of you? What are you doing to take care of yourself? And it might get tiresome, but honestly, I understand from being here for so long and doing this for so long, and knowing that I'm tapping on the door real softly and then running as fast as I can, because there's somebody that burns me out. And maybe I haven't had as good boundaries that I should have had, that I have allowed their stuff to burn me out. And now I don't know what to do with it. So now I'm tapping softly and turning around and running, or, hoping that they don't answer the phone. And, you don't want to say that, but you do get tired. But I've had to learn boundaries, understand that, and that I'm not a bad person. I'm not here to save anyone. I'm here to help them understand their life, because once they've transitioned out of the program, I'm not going to be their savior still. I'm here to help them understand how to manage the system, help them with the resources that are available, and know that they survived before they came to me, and they will continue surviving after they leave from me. So I can't take that away from them, which sometimes we have a tendency of doing.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm hearing from you, Patrice, that's so important is that you're modeling it, right? And I've heard from so many people, my boss says it's okay to take a break or take vacations, but they never do. So I feel guilty doing it, right? So it does start with modeling boundaries and being able to say, you know what? I'm booked this week. I don't have any more time, but I really want to meet with you. And so, I can get you in 2 weeks from today. Just being able to model that it's okay to say no can give people permission. So I think that's so important. So thank you for saying that and highlighting that.
Well, I think we've worked with people who, and especially women, who don't know how to say no, who have been taught and raised that we have to be everything to everybody. And we have clients that, I can't let my children get dirty. I've got to take their clothes off and clean them all the time. And I have to do this. And everybody's looking at me. If my children are dirty, if my children are acting this way, it's my fault. So we're taught that way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. There's the, the caretaker pressure as women. And then, for our advocates too, there is that gap when it comes to employment, how hard you work, how you're presenting yourself. There's so many other ways you have to monitor yourself, and so many other ways you're told that you need to show up at 150%, or else, or else it's on you and it's not anyone else's problem. So I think it's especially hard when it comes to that. And I think for me, in terms of, talking to the people we coach, is being honest. Like, I'll be the first one to say I'm so bad at self-care. I've tried so many times to learn how to breathe, and even when I was in my clinical training, and I can't stand some of them I can do, but I'm just not out here in through my nose, out through my mouth 3 times. That's just not me. And so I'm the worst at it, and so I think it starts with being honest about that. And so for me, when I know that someone else is burnt out, it's easier for me to want to help, right? Because it's separate from myself. But B, it looks like, like challenging that person. It looks like, getting them to name it themselves, right? Because that's the hardest part, is naming it yourself. And if you can at least do that and have to hit that moment where you put it on the table, then we can do something about it. Because then at least, it's not something we're hiding. It's not something we're shaming anymore. There's no running from it. And I think, Mara, your point of, when we talk about vicarious trauma and these sorts of things, I've never had a conversation outside of the 3 of us where it wasn't, you didn't have good enough boundaries, you weren't doing enough self-care early enough, you didn't do preventative work. It's always very shameful. Burnout is thought to be like the end of your career in social services. It's the end of everything. You become unworkable, you become unusable in the field. And that's not at all what it is. I don't think that anyone, even with the best preventative measures, could avoid it forever. So I think definitely for me, it starts with just being honest of like, I'm bad at it, so I'm not expecting you to come and get coaching from me and end up being a rock star at it. But let's at least be honest about it. Let's take the shame away from it. So at least it becomes accessible to us to work with it and make it malleable and affect the process of it rather than just being stuck.
I think when you were talking, Liz, I was just thinking, what message does that send? Or what does that mean? What's the implication for what we think about our clients if we think it's shameful to be impacted, right? So we can't, at the one hand, say it's normal, we're trauma informed, we understand people are going to be impacted by their experiences, and that's, that we believe healing is possible, we believe in people's resilience. But if it happens to us, something is wrong with me, right? Like we've got to be able to hold both that the experience that my clients are having, I too will have, right? In my own life because of my own trauma and as a result of the compounding trauma of being in this field, right? And that the more I can be compassionate with myself and the more skillful I become at addressing the vicarious trauma responses in me, the more present I can be with others and what's coming up for them, right? So instead of looking at it as you must do these things to avoid ever being impacted so you can be a good advocate, it's part of your work is learning these things so that in a very real way, you can understand them and help others understand them too, right? So my best work comes from knowing what this feels like, knowing that I can be experiencing a ton of anxiety and that I have some skills to help me get through that. And now I can tell someone else about that. And maybe what worked for me might work for them too. If it doesn't, at least I have a ton of empathy for how hard that is, right? And I can be present in that with them. So it's part of the work. It's not separate from the work. It's not what you do to, it's not like I go get a degree in vicarious trauma response so that I can do the work. This is part of the work, right? And this is integrated into the work. So, back on the handout, there's a little, this little square here. I'm just going to read it. It says, as providers, our executive functioning, or this front part of our brain here, the part of our brain that's only online when we feel safe, is the most important tool we have, right? Being able to really be integrated and see a situation from a calm place is our tool, right? It's what we bring into the home. So we must be able to remain in our windows of tolerance, right? To be able to have access to that executive functioning when working with our clients in order to be effective ourselves. That means we have to grow our resiliency to triggers in order to really be able to prioritize skillful coping and self-care. That doesn't mean we don't get triggered, right? That means that coming back to our advocate here, walking into this home, of course, you're going to be in shock. You are going to have a trauma response walking into that. Either you're going to go into numbing and dissociating. You might be one of those people that really clicks in crisis and you respond, but you disconnect from your body and your experience, right? And you have a fallout later. You might freeze. You might walk in, you might freeze. Whatever you do, you're going to have a trauma response to it. It's a traumatic, life-threatening situation. You're going to have a trauma response, right? So when I leave that home, my first thing is I'm going to be trauma informed in how I understand myself and the whole family. We were all doing the best we could with what tools we have. We were all in a really overwhelming situation, right? And I'm going to recognize I cannot do this alone. Just like I do not expect them to do this alone, just like I want to show up for them and follow up with them and be their support, I'm going to get support myself, whether I think I need it or not, right? I just went through something really overwhelming. I'm going to call Patrice, I'm going to call Liz, I'm going to call Kevin or Mara or whoever, and I'm going to get some support. I'm going to talk through what came up, what happened, right? That's being a skillful provider, right? I'm going to implement some self-care strategies right away. And that might mean that I take the next day off. That might mean that I say, I had a really traumatic incident at work yesterday. And even though I think I could work today, I'm going to give myself permission to take a mental health day. And I'm going to surround myself with things that feel soothing to me. I'm going to go on walks. I'm going to call my best friend and chat about our favorite show that we're both watching. And I'm going to recognize that if I want this family to cope in a skillful way, I too have to cope in a skillful way, right? And I too have to attend to myself. So that's what resilient providers do. We commit to daily practices that grow our window of tolerance, right? We commit to taking our lunch breaks. We commit to moving our bodies. We commit to, lots of self-affirmation and taking stock of what we're doing well, praising ourselves and sharing what we're proud of with others. We commit to these daily practices that grow our window, right? Grow our ability to stay in this space of calm regulation. We identify when we're out of our window because we will go out of our window. So we identify what it feels like when I'm no longer operating from that space. And I learn what works for me, right? So for Liz, it's not a breathing exercise. It might be watching your favorite, true crime documentary, whatever, right? But you implement what's skillful for you. If it works for you, great, right? But you figure out when I go out of my window, what is it that I need to get re-regulated? And I do it, right? I recognize that when I'm out of my window, I am not as useful. And that part of my work is that learning and implementing practices for self-care, right?
I think also part of that is, and letting other people that we share the home with have an understanding and know how we need support.
Mhm.
Sometimes you go through this stuff and you need to let them know, this is how I need to deal with this.
Yeah.
Back off a little bit. Let me have my little bit of time to work through this, and then we can get back together. So I think that's as important. And I think self-reflection. When I was sitting there listening to you, I was thinking, you know, the whole diversity, and self-reflection. I think we need to know that. And when I said you talked about that, it's not why am I like this, but what was it? How did I get this way? What has hurt me?
Yeah.
I was thinking that, in growing up, the mantra that I think most people of color is, I've got to be 10 times better than everybody else. I got to make sure that I'm doing this, crossing all T's, dotting all the I's. I got to be better. I have to make sure that, and it maybe it's on a personal color. Anybody who walks to the beat of a different drum here in Utah, it could be maybe not color, it could be religion. If you're not a part of whatever the main thing is, you feel like you've got to work harder to prove yourself. And it made me think. So when my expectations of myself, I've got to do a lot of self-reflecting. Why am I doing this?
Yep.
Why am I thinking I have to go in this house and make everything perfect? You got to do this, 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 and this, and we got to get it done. And then I walk out of the house feeling like, yeah, I did this. I accomplished my objective. I've done this. And that comes from me feeling like I have to be 10 times better than everybody else. I got to prove that I've done this. And accomplish this for whatever reason. And then I'm upset with the client because we haven't gotten from this point to this point. And then I take this on as my fault. This is my problem and I've let the whole world down. So I think that what you're saying is right. I think there's also that piece that we don't always talk about. And then I think that when we go home, we need to let everybody else know, this is what I need from you. And that's kind of in our circle of security thing where we're looking at what I need from you. I need you to hear me. I need you to support me. I need you not to give me reasons why. I don't need you to tell me anything. I just need you to put your arms around me and support me, maybe not physically, but let me know that you're there so that when I come back and I need that touch physically or emotionally, you're there to do that and you'll know how to do that because I have told you what I need from you.
Yeah.
So I think that's all it, but it's also the same way. How do we go into the homes? What do you need from me? How do I support you? So I can be there for them too in that way.
Right. And the thing that I think is so important to let the people who are watching hear is that neither you, Patrice, or you, Mara, have said anything about your job or this and that is to manage the family, is to manage the family's mental health, is to protect or fix their mental health. It's about showing up. And the only thing you can be truly responsible for managing is yourself and what you need. And we can't, as providers, take that on for our families because that's when we get trapped. That's when we see, the signs that Mara, that you shared with us. This is when we see, Patrice, what you're talking about, where you come in and you're like, I've got to work 10 times harder. You reaffirm that for yourself, especially when you have identities where that work harder is so embedded in how you navigate a dominant culture. We just reaffirm it for ourselves. So it's important for it to just be, very clear that, well, both of you shared a lot and they've, the things you're sharing are mirroring each other. Not one of those things have been taken responsibility for the mental health of your family. At most and at best, it's been just showing up as your best self. not managing it for them.
And just in the same way that Patrice said, you know, you don't tell your family, you know, what I need from you is to be responsible for me, right? What I need from you is to fix me. You need empathy, you need space, you need validation, you need support, you need presence. I think the clients we work with are just like us, right? In that way, then most of the time, no one expects to be fixed. No one wants to be fixed, right? And it feels actually really bad when someone thinks their job is to fix you or change you in some way. We really need someone to hold space with us, right? And so I think that was so beautiful what you said, Patrice, that, you know, maybe I just need some gentleness when I get home, right? Maybe sometimes I'm just going to have a really heavy heart that, like, it's been a rough day and I'm just sad. And I don't need you to fix that for me. I just need, you know, some presence. You know, do you want to talk about it, or do you want to just sit here in some silence together? And often our families need the same thing, right? They don't need solutions as much as they need a lot of validation and empathy. So we get to practice it for ourselves. And then, you know, we get to get better at it with others. If we can tolerate our own difficult emotions, we can be more present with others too.
Yeah.
So
Just be able to lean in with them.
Yep.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, you know, there are some resources that you both have as coaches that I've sent to you around vicarious trauma and secondary trauma and burnout. And so in the folder, those will be available. I'm going to just share one really quickly because I want to give people a visual of what that looks like to come up with a skillful response plan. So I'm just going to share my screen for just a minute so I can pull that up. This comes from the Utah Center for Evidence-Based Treatment. They do a lot of training on helping providers be more resilient to burnout. And so this is really simple. And I love the team I used to work with at the Rape Recovery Center. We would use this language a lot with each other. I'm in the red, I'm in the yellow, I'm in the green. People started to adopt, I'm in the orange, right? Like we started to have a whole spectrum outside of this. But really starting to recognize, there's a blank version here that you can fill out for yourself, but I'm going to focus on this example that they gave us. What are the thoughts, behaviors, sensations, and feelings that tell me that I'm in the green, which means I'm not feeling very burned out. I'm like feeling pretty good. That might look like I'm thinking, you know, fondly about work. I'm contemplating new interests, like I'm hosting dinners and I'm starting new projects and feeling creative and I'm feeling alive. I'm exercising, playing with my kids. I can, like, you know, laugh at things. Mistakes are not that big of a deal. I'm feeling calm. I'm feeling, you know, excited. I'm feeling a sense of appreciation and wonder in the world. I can experience sadness and feel it in my body, and that doesn't feel too overwhelming. And what I like about this is that you still need to have skillful responses when you're in the green. So that's not empty. That's not like, okay, don't got to do anything. That's okay. So I'm able to be in the green because I'm taking mini breaks during the day. I'm doing my breathing. I'm doing my yoga. And of course, this is going to be different for everyone, right? This is blank because this is what that looks like for you. And so thinking about when I'm in the green, what do I need to be doing, right? And then what does it look like when I'm moving into the yellow? What are some of the warning signs that I'm getting overwhelmed with the work that I'm doing? Might be blaming others more, like in this example, might be obsessing over mistakes that I made, finding myself rushing from task to task. I'm running late. I'm like binging on Netflix and then getting panicked because I spent too much time there, and then overworking over here, right? And you're finding you're agitated, you're fatigued, you're feeling guilt, restlessness, you're tight in your body. How you're going to respond when you're in that space is going to look different, right? Compassion is always a really important piece, finding self-compassion. How do I reduce my workload, right? How do I take this sign that I keep like wanting to binge on Netflix as a sign that I do need to take some things off my plate, right? Instead of sort of shaming myself for that. Maybe I need to clean some house or get organized. Maybe I need to go make an appointment with my therapist, whatever, with my coach, whatever that looks like. And then finally, like, what does it look like when I'm really in the red? And you'll notice at the end there, the first thing is take a mental health day. This is when it's like, we really need to intervene. We need to do something to shift the dynamic, right? So if I'm finding myself being really agitated, feeling a lot of shame, pain, overwhelmed, oftentimes our bodies will get sick. So you might notice that our body just like takes us out and it's like, nope, now you have, your immune system is compromised because you're so stressed and overwhelmed, and now you're sick, and now you have to take a break, right? So encouraging people as they walk away from this conversation, or with you as coaches, come up with your plan. Think about what your red, green, yellow looks like, and what it's going to look like for you to skillfully respond when you're in each of these areas. Share that with your coach, share that with your team, so that you can work together to create a supportive environment. And then I really love being able to just shorthand say, you know what, I'm having a red day and I just need to like take some things off my plate. Can we reschedule that meeting, right? So that there is just a normalization of, we're all going to have this these responses, and that there's a team of support that says, yeah, you need to do what you need to do to be okay, right? So I'll stop sharing that. Again, that's available through the coaches and through your resources. And I'm gonna turn the time back over to you two to take us out. But
you want to talk about what resources we have, Liz, and then I'll close out? Or
yeah, I can start us off. Definitely, if you're seeing this video maybe more as like a new hire sort of thing, or you're just starting coaching with Patrice or I, you may not have seen what Mara just shared, but it is something that we're looking at, implementing and using. And as Mara mentioned, she did share some really great self-assessments and some other tools with us to help us normalize a burnout, help us normalize needing something, normalizing that providers are allowed to need too, that even though, your role is to show up for the families, and we talk so much about how are you showing up for the families, that especially this episode is part of a larger opportunity for us to really normalize showing up for yourself, showing up for each other, showing up as a team, and not just showing up for our teamwork that makes us look like we're doing better at our jobs, but showing up for a team of just people sitting in similar spaces and navigating some similar things. So there is a lot of emphasis from Patrice and I to really promote that and normalize it and destigmatize it across the board, because that's when a lot of good work can start happening. As far as other resources, of course, Patrice and I, Mara, as long as we have her, we have Kevin, and even if it's hard for you to reach out to some of the more like designated resources, find someone on your team who you feel could get it, or maybe they've heard enough between like processing and team meetings to get where you're coming from with your burnout. They've heard enough about your caseload. Identify a person that that you can go to, and if it is a peer, check in and say, hey, I'm looking for some processing time, some guidance on this. I came to you for this reason. Are you emotionally available to me right now? Do you have what you need for yourself to be able to be there for me? So just learning how to navigate your needs, how to talk about your needs, how to show up for others, but also allow other people to show up for you when you need it.
thanks, Liz. That's so important. I think, again, I'll say this topic has been very important. I mean, really, 2020 was a rough year for all of us. We've been in lockdown. We haven't been able to see people that we care about. life has changed for us and it's spilling into 2021 now. We feel like hopefully soon with all these shots and everything hopefully opening up that we'll be able to get into our life again. I don't think life will be normal, but that's all right. We are learning a new side of ourselves. We're learning that we can handle hard things, difficult things. And so maybe if that's the best thing that we can say we got out of 2020, all right, then that's the best thing, because it's always a great thing to learn that you are stronger than you thought you were. So with that being said, have a wonderful rest of your day and join us again for our 4th episode in our Trauma Informed. And thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.